My dear Bagginses and Boffins, Dukes and Brandy Bugs, Rubs, Jobs, Wooden Blowers, Folgers, Grey Scarlows, Brownfoots.
Today we're talking about the Lord of the Rings movies and how they redefined epic. But how long will that definition last? Now, I think I speak for all Lord of the Rings fans when I say like these movies were so beyond, I think, expectations going in. When you're talking about a fantasy genre type movie back in the early 2000s, you were thinking like some movies that come to mind are like Never Ending Story, and that kind of stuff where there's a lot more puppetry than what we see nowadays, and just there's a lot more background sort of scenery that adds to the fantasy element, but the movies themselves were just good. So I think everyone was blown away by the just the sights and the sound that you get from the original trilogy. And I don't think anyone had expected to see that coming from a fantasy film. And I think it went a long way to pushing the envelope in terms of what they could do, not just in terms of CGI, but also in how they were able to kind of mix the CGI elements in the battle scenes with miniatures. As any film buff definitely loves movies with miniatures in them, as well as set pieces, and just combining all of them. And I think that was masterful vision by Jackson. And yeah, I actually think that these movies are still like they are still sort of the pinnacle that what you're trying to reach in terms of staying power. I really do. I think people still in the movie biz still look to those movies and say, is ours going to hold up like that one has and is still doing so? Rewatching them, I see no issues with the CGI. I think it holds up beautifully. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's weird because the fact that they went with they chose to use CGI for Gollum, and
that was so innovative.
like that's such a bold choice too, right? Like it's early 2000s. That tech is just coming sort of into to a point where it's useful in that way, where that it doesn't feel so out of place that you're almost like that's clearly a cartoon in a live action movie. And the fact that they went with that choice, when I thought that maybe they could have just done some makeup on someone and or even Andy himself and have him play Gollum live action. The fact that they chose to go CGI and it works so well.
You couldn't do it another way. Yeah.
Like to get his movements like that, you're right. Like certain scenes, in order, like that's why they ultimately I think went with CGI, but like such a risk and paid off, as well as those battle scenes. I've seen some of that behind the scenes stuff where they were using this computer program that generated battles, but like the computer program was trying to give each character in the army its own sort of idea of how to fight, and so when they come together, you get a very chaotic, sprawling battle, which is what we see, and it's what you want for those scenes, because that's ultimately what's happening. And that technology was new. See, like the body suit that Andy was in is new, like the whole thing. And those are huge risks. They paid off, and then on top of that, the fact that they went with so much what people would consider, even like today, but even back then, more artsy shots, where you see just scenery with hardly any. You might see a few of the Fellowship running on the ground below, but there are scenes where you don't see anything except for scenery. True. And that bit adds to it. And then as we've talked countless times about the way they play the emotion back and forth with the action, so you're always getting a taste of each, and it just makes you want to cut, like every scene you're in, you want to stay in it, and then when you cut to something, you're just as intrigued as you were previously. So your body and mind is almost having like a battle about which group do you want to follow right now. Like I want to see what Frodo's doing. I want to see what Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli are doing. What's Merry and Pippin? Like you just it cuts all between all of them, and you always want to go back, but you always want to stay and see what they're doing because they're doing something exciting as well. And so to constantly be pushing the story like that, I think it's not just the CGI and all the technical aspects, but also the the cinematography and as well as the storytelling techniques that Jackson employs. I think it's to me, I feel that there is a lot of missed opportunity in today's big action movies because they are so focused on certain elements that you can find in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but they're not playing all of the elements. They're just focusing on one or maybe two. Sometimes they like to play both the action with the emotion, but you're not getting a break from either one of those. You're not getting the scenery. You're not getting the journey. So I think that not only does it have it obviously has staying power now, but I think it continues to because there's something that we just aren't getting in terms of how these stories are told. And that's me. I know some people just love the new Marvel stuff and think that's pretty epic, but I think that those aren't going to have as much staying power.
Well, yeah, they're gonna just keep redoing Marvel over and over again.
Yeah.
Different actors. Yeah.
And like it is, there are some really good technical achievements in those as well. I don't want to underplay that. And same as like the Game of Thrones, as critical as you want to be, there are some really good scenes in those end seasons as well that are.
But you're right. Lord of the Rings set the standard.
Yeah, and it.
I mean, everyone was comparing um, the siege scene, the battle for Winterfell, with how's that compared to Helm's Deep?
That's right.
Lord of the Rings set the standard.
That's right, and the same comparisons. I see these same comparisons with Star Wars, with Marvel, even with any like World War II epic, like all of this stuff. Yeah, it just seems to me that there is still that comparison, and I think what's missing is you can't just do a direct scene to scene comparison. Although I will say Helm's Deep is just stunning. That it's going to be so tough for someone to come along because everything that we see now, it's good and it is trying to emulate that kind of feeling. But you need something. I don't know what it is, but you need something that pushes beyond that. And makes people really take notice the way that we did with Helm's Deep. And I think it's in part the way Jackson tells that story. He knows how to play the beats with the music and with the intercutting between different groups. And also the build up, because there is so much build up to that battle that I think, so just taking your example with Game of Thrones, while the series had been building to that moment, like a few episodes prior, we don't actually get that same feeling that you get in Helm's Deep. Like imagine you're watching Lord of the Rings and you're at that point where they're waiting prior to the orcs even arriving, and there's just this tone going on that as Pippin describes just perfectly, that you don't want to be in a battle, but waiting on the edge of one is even worse. And I think that that is lost often in a lot of these newer movies where they just want to get to it and they don't have that sort of build up. So to me, yeah, I think it has tons of staying power. This article, it does talk a lot about the technical aspects and stuff like that, but I think more than that, it is how the story is told and how the battles are told. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. We don't have like John talking to a teenager telling him this is a good sword or anything like that.
yeah, like that scene. That scene, you're right. That's a perfect example of a scene that I think most films, if the filmmakers actually write it and film it, I think it gets cut when they go to release it.
Hmm.
And the fact that that is in there in Lord of the Rings, you're right. I think those are the scenes that are missing because, like, let's be honest, like CGI is getting great and choreography is getting to a point where it feels real and it looks real and it is impactful. Like you feel the fighting as it's happening on screen, or you feel the emotion and uh something there is something else on outside of all that that is still drawing me to compare it to Lord of the Rings to say how does it make me feel compared to how Lord of the Rings makes me feel in those scenes, and why does my mind automatically go, hey, I wonder how this holds up to Lord of the Rings stand, like, you know what I mean? So I do think there is something else there, and I think, yeah, you've got it, where it's those scenes that
Hmm.
most people, I think, pass on the first watch, and it gets cut often in most film and television at this point.
But it does make me. I'm just thinking now that one thing Game of Thrones did that we don't see in the films was Lord of the Rings films was, in Helm's Deep had the women and children hiding in like the back caves,
Yeah.
and Game of Thrones showed uh, they showed like what the women of the court were doing, like at the siege of King's Landing. You had
Yeah.
Cersei and Sansa in the castle, and then at Winterfell they had Tyrion and Sansa in the crypts, and you could see what the other people were doing. So they don't do that in
You're right.
Lord of the
And I
Rings.
think so what I would say to that is I agree. I think those moments in those battle scenes are on par with the emotional um sort of sentiment that you get from a Lord of the Rings battle, but what's missing in those battles is then the visual aspect of it, because at that time they didn't have as big a budget uh, to do a full on battle scene. So you only got these kind of bits and pieces, which they're still decently choreographed. You don't see all of it put together. And so yeah, I
Yep.
agree. I think that's a great example of how Game of Thrones had elements of it all along the way, and then just putting it together is the hard part, because you've got to cut things and you've got to yeah, like you have only a certain amount of time on screen, especially on a TV show where you are definitely limited on time.
Yep.
So yeah, I think you're right. I think that those scenes are my favorite of that battle, because you're right. Those are the scenes where you are getting something that you don't see in the Lord of the Rings battles. At least not in Helm's Deep. You see that more so um, later on, because when Pippin is running around in the city, you do get bits and pieces of that, and especially with Denethor and how his mind is behaving at that
Yep.
point. So yeah, I think it's really about putting it all together, because yeah, like you've got some battles in these movies have emotional points, some have the excellent visuals, some have excellent CGI, but it's bringing it all together and getting this fully finished product that can compete in any one of those areas with Lord of the Rings. And I think that's the challenge.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't have much else to add to this.
You covered it. Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't have a lot to add either.
yeah, it's I don't use the term very often, but it is epic, and I do think that it is still the bar that everyone is trying to rise to. Even with the release of the new Star Wars and Marvel kind of coming to its big conclusion battles, I still think that people are going to jump to Lord of the Rings and say, does it hold up to that standard all the way back in 2002?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and we,
let us know what you guys think in the comments down below, and subscribe for the next video, and we'll see you guys there.
I regret to announce this is the end. I bid you all a very fond farewell.